So I think it's important to put things into perspective as we have faced an unprecedented year, and it has been a crazy year at that, guys. So our first case was on January 25th. At that time, the World Health Organization had predicted a infection fatality rate of 3.4%. We've since learned that was totally wrong, and hindsight is 2020. In February, Ontario declared a state of emergency, and by March, we were in a lockdown. We were told at this time that it would take 2 weeks to protect the hospitals. At that time, Theresa Tam, our chief medical officer, was saying things like putting a mask on an asymptomatic person is not beneficial. And most people haven't learned how to use masks, and there is no need to use a mask for well people. Well, in April, we were in really close to the peak of the pandemic. We had at that time, we had the lines being told, stay at home, wash your hands, do your part. And we did. We listened to the public health officials, and there were many unknowns at that time. By May, we were starting to see some cases go down. There were still no mask mandates, no conversations of masks until the end of the month, although cases and deaths were at their peak at the beginning of the month. By June, the Niagara Regional Council had passed the temporary face covering bylaw. And at that time, interestingly, cases testing had doubled and in some cases tripled. By July, we had entered stage 2. Cases and deaths had gone down, stabilized. In August, we entered stage 3, and now here we are in September. Next slide, please. So the conversation is what's next? And before I get into my position on the temporary mask bylaw, I want to explain who I represent. So full disclosure, I am, as you can see, representing the group Hugs Over Masks. We are the largest group internationally against the arbitrary masking of healthy people. And not only that, I am a resident of the Niagara region. I've lived in Beamsville my entire life. So I bring an interesting perspective, having personally spoken to thousands of Canadians from across this country and many people across the world who have been severely affected negatively by these mandates. So who do I represent? I represent the people like myself with legitimate exemptions who are unable to wear face masks, but are facing bullying, shaming, harassment, discrimination every single day in the Niagara region. I appreciate that all the conversations tonight about mental health. So I wanted to remind you that this is much more than just about masks. These are people with physical disabilities, mental health problems, sexual abuse victims, people like Sheila, who I just met this week, who is a rape victim who had her mouth covered. Now she has PTSD, and she also has a severely autistic child. Her life has been destroyed as a result of your bylaws. Next slide, please. So I may look like just one person here, guys, but standing behind me are 100,000 people in the Niagara region. So my message is no, it's not just a mask. Although tolerated by most, there are many people who cannot wear face coverings, and that is exactly why we have these exemptions. Now, I'll admit the province passed the buck on to you guys and the business owners to enforce these, in my opinion, scientifically questionable mask bylaws. Due to a sense of urgency, a lack of communication, and paralyzing fear, the result was a high degree of ignorance on the part of the people who were made responsible for enforcing these bylaws, the already financially struggling business owners of Niagara. Now, although most of the business owners are honoring the exemptions, there have been an alarming number of reports made to myself about the discrimination across the Niagara region. I'm sure your bylaw office can quantify that number. An unforeseen and more imposing perceived threat to those who are unable to wear masks are other people, the general public. This is where the shaming, harassment, bullying, discrimination is really happening, and these concerns need to be addressed immediately because they are causing egregious and disgusting discrimination and violations of the Human Rights Code. Next slide, please. So let's talk about mental health. I know a lot of the delegations tonight were talking about mental health. So here we have some facts on mental health. In 2016, the second leading cause of both hospitalizations and deaths in the Niagara region were from self-harm. In 2019, this was increasing significantly, affecting specifically the youth of our population the most. In 2012, for some reason, that's the most recent year, 41 people had died from suicide. So now we have a population that just experienced an unprecedented year. Many who, like myself, are unable to wear masks, who are now facing increased distress as a result of your bylaw. So what I ask you is, what are the suicides of 2012 compared to other years? Because if the deaths from suicide outweigh the, let's say, 12 deaths outside long-term care facilities from people with or from COVID-19, if they outweigh those deaths, maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing here. Next slide, please. So, given the fact that there are unavoidable problems with this bylaw causing distress, this one-size-fits-all approach, surely we should be able to justify the use of these masks using science. But unfortunately, we can't, because in the words of Denny Rancourt, masks don't work. Why? Because the main method of transmission of SARS-CoV-2 is long-resistant time aerosol particles. These are less than 2.5 microns. Without getting into the science here, guys, that means they are too fine to be blocked by masks, certainly by bandanas, balaclavas, or any of these cloth masks that I see that are decorative and shipped in from China. So surgical non-surgical masks and cloth masks are not scientific and do more harm than good. I want to repeat myself. They do more harm than good. I can't say that without having science to back it up. So here we have the first random control trial ever done in 2015 that cautioned against the use of cloth masks because they increased the risk of viral infection due to moisture retention, reusing of cloth masks, and poor filtration. The next study from 2019 talked about the filtering efficiency of cloth masks being relatively low and went on to say that washing and drying practices deteriorated their efficiency. Why haven't we heard one public health official talk about that washing masks decreases their efficiency, right? Another study suggests that homemade masks should be used as a last resort. So the only thing we could look at is the surgical or medical respirators, but even the medical respirators and masks are proven to be scientifically insignificant. They provide scientifically insignificant protection. Next slide, please. There are a number of unknowns when we talk about the broad public policies of enforcing a mask bylaw on the public. These questions are, do used or loaded masks become sources of enhanced transmission for the wearers? Do masks that are worn become collectors or retainers of these pathogens? Are the large droplets that we keep talking about captured by the mask then atomized or aerosolized into breathable components? What are the dangers of the bacterial growth on these masks? Another really great question, should pathogen-laden masks be disposed in hazardous waste containers suitable for a risk group 3 human pathogen as defined by the Center of Biosecurity? That is how COVID-19, that SARS-CoV-2 is a stage 3. So what are the negative social consequences of mass society, specifically in children with a developing mind as they're learning about the world? What are the negative psychological consequences, both from the mask, but also this fear-based modification? What are the environmental consequences? And do these fibers, specifically some of these masks that are made, decorative masks from China, do they contain harmful substances when you breathe them in?
Mr. McDonald, you have 1 minute.
Okay, next slide, please. So there is hope, guys, and this is my message, is that according to the CDC's best estimates right now, 90% of Canada's population has a 99.8% recovery rate. There is nothing to fear. We must get over this irrational fear, because irrational fear is the real virus. Next slide, please. Skip the next slide and go right to the right to the next one. So why the focus? We'll stop here. So this is what I want to talk about when it comes to irrational fear. The seasonal flu is 1.7 times more deadly for 3/4 of Canada's population. So when are we going to be able to take off these masks? Next slide, please. Guys, the answer is blowing in the wind. End the mandatory masking of healthy people, and you will end the confusion, discrimination, and bullying. Educate the public on the individual infection fatality
Mr. McDonald?
recovery rates. Yep.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you very much.